Hello, everybody, and welcome into another episode of New England Sports Weekly. As always, I am your host, Sean Metcalf, and I am glad you've decided to once again join me on the live stream if you're listening live, or if you are listening on the podcast on Spotify or on SoundCloud on your daily routine, whatever that may be. I hope you are enjoying your day, and I hope you're ready for another fun-filled episode of New England Sports Weekly as we get ready to break down all of the happenings here in Boston sports in New England. And we will definitely have a lot to talk about here as we are knee deep into the NBA playoffs. The Stanley Cup playoffs are in full swing, although the Boston Bruins have bowed out. So we don't have any more Bruins playoff games to talk about. But we still have plenty of Bruins to talk about as we are getting down towards the stretch. And of course, the Boston Red Sox are underway, and they've been a little underwhelming, to say the least. So we'll see how that all shakes out here for your Boston Red Sox. But of course, I hope that you've all been able to, especially if you're up here in the Northeast after we've had a long winter. It seems like this winter was super long, but we're out of it now and we're into some beautiful weather. It was 80, 90 something degrees. I think it was like 92 degrees on Saturday. Sunday was even after the rain stopped. It was nice, beautiful. It's been a beautiful week here, minus the couple 1 or 2 days of rain that we've had. And it seems as though we're in for another beautiful weekend, which is going to be nice because I'm heading down to Boston to watch the Red Sox and Mariners game as a birthday present to myself. Bought some tickets for that game. That should be interesting. I hope the Red Sox bats keep on raking like they have lately and the starting pitching stays hot. It's just I'm going to cross my fingers for the bullpen because that is one of their major issues. Obviously, we'll get into that later on, but hopefully the bats keep on swinging it like they have over the last couple of series where they might have actually woken up. They might actually be alive, folks. Maybe a little too late. We'll find out, but it'll be fun. So I do have the Twitter account because because of YouTube, I have to have a certain amount of followers, and I don't have it yet where I can go live from my phone. Obviously, if you're watching right now, you're watching from YouTube. You can watch live now. But as far as going live from Fenway Park from my phone, I'll have to do that from the Twitter account, or at least send you videos from that. We'll see how that all shakes out. But I will try to get you some videos, some pictures, and put that up on the New England Sports Weekly Twitter account and on my personals as well. So that should be fun. We'll see how that all goes. I'm hoping for a good game because if not, it might be a game where I might be getting 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe a 6-pack, a 12-pack or two, a beer in me. Although that's going to be expensive down at Fenway. So, but depending on how the game shakes out, it'll either go one of two ways. I'll be jumping for joy, or I will be swimming in the Sam Adams or whatever they got, whatever craft brews they got going on down there. But it should be fun. Like I said, I will give you plenty of content from that game. But without further ado, we will jump into the Out of the Box segment, which is still sponsored by me. Anybody want to sponsor? Anybody got a business they want to promote? Anybody want to put a banner up on the live stream here? I can replace my Twitter handle, or I can put another little banner up there for you folks. Whatever you want, you can bring it on my way and push your advertise. I'll push your business if that's what you want. But no, it's all jokes aside, it's still the Out of the Box segment is still unsponsored, but it is time to go down the line if you will, with the Boston sports scene, as the Boston Celtics, since we last talked, took Game 7 at home against the Milwaukee Bucks, the defending Eastern Conference and defending NBA champions. So they took down Giannis. It was a hard-fought series, and it lived up to everything I thought. I said Celtics in 7 in that series, and it lived up to all the hype. It lived up to all of it there. There was no disappointment in that series. That was one of the better series I've seen in a long time. Now, obviously, there were a few moments here and there where maybe with some calls, some going back and forth that I wasn't happy about. But in the end, the Celtics got the outcome I thought, and they are moving on up to the Eastern Conference Finals, and they face their foes in the Miami Heat, who they've had some battles with here in recent memory. Obviously, they played them in the Eastern Conference Finals back in 2020. And remember, that was the bubble series down in Disney World in the middle of COVID. And the Celtics lost in 6 to the Heat, who went on to the NBA Finals and lost to the Los Angeles Lakers. Now the Celtics are looking for revenge, although it did not start off great last night, at least before the game, is Marcus Smart was ruled out of the game with his foot injury that did prop up beforehand. Although he wasn't in a boot, he made the flight, he was around, but he was in his street clothes, albeit his silky getup that he had going on there, his jump, whatever you want to call whatever he had going on there. But he did have a nice suit nonetheless going on there. A nice Miami Beach style suit, I guess if you want to call it that, going on. But anyways, the Celtics lost Marcus Smart with his foot injury. Now we'll see how long that goes. There's no indication if he'll play tomorrow in game number 2. As of right now, it's still up in the air. And the more surprising injury / illness of the evening was Al Horford. Al Horford, who is in the illness protocol there. It's not exactly the COVID protocol, but it's the health and safety. There we go. I always want to call it COVID, but I know it's not COVID protocol because I know he doesn't have COVID-19. At least he hasn't tested positive for it that we know of. But he's in that health and safety protocol. And the weird thing was he was on the flight. He was hanging out with his teammates. He was there for shoot around a couple hours before the game. And of course, there were some rumors, or at least reports, I should say, that there are some Celtics staffers that do have, that I believe have tested positive for COVID, or at least have had some type of illness where obviously a lot of the players were in close contact, but apparently Al Horford was the one that was the most, or not most, but was the closest of all the players to those staff members. And obviously nobody knows the staff members who they are, but nonetheless, Al Horford missed game 1 of the series, and no word on whether he will be able to play tomorrow, depending on if he tested actually positive for COVID, or if he just has some other type of illness that he may be ready to go, or if he just had close contact. Nobody seems to know the exact answer, obviously, outside of the Celtics, and they're not going to give anything up until tomorrow. But it definitely showed in yesterday's game, at least in the second half, because the first half, the Celtics actually looked really good. They looked like they might actually be able to steal one here with 2 of their starters missing from the game, and Al Horford and Marcus Smart. Now, obviously, Jason Tatum is the superstar. He is a top 5 player in the NBA at this point, what he's evolved into. But still, Marcus Smart, not Marcus Smart, but the Boston Bruins, to have those on my mind. Take 3. But anyways, the Boston Celtics were doing pretty well with their core. And then, of course, they melted down in the third quarter. The Heat absolutely torched them, had a 22-2 run, and they ended up taking yesterday's game. And it wasn't a complete laugher like you thought it might be towards the end. The Celtics were able to cut it to, at one point, a 7-point lead before the Heat ended up with a double-digit win. But that third quarter really screwed them over, and it brought back flashback from the 2020 bubble series in that game. So the Celtics are off to not so hot of a start down in Miami, missing a couple key players in Smart and Horford, and lost game one in an utterly maddening fashion. But in good news, it was only game one, so still have plenty of time to get back in this series as the Celtics look to even things up tomorrow night down in Miami. Now, over to their counterparts in the Boston Garden, the Boston Bruins lost Game 7 as they bowed out of this series in 7 games to the Carolina Hurricanes, where, yes, I said in last week's show that the Boston Bruins had the more talented overall top-tier elite talent in Pastrnak, Bergeron, and Marchand. Those guys are probably going to be better than anybody that the Hurricanes have, at least overall. But as I said, Carolina is the more deep team. They have Svechnikov, Brandon Aho, you go on down the line, Jarvis. They have more depth to that team. They're a more well-rounded team as far as their frontline skaters are concerned. Like I said, the Boston Bruins have probably the better high-end talent offensively and better high-end talent defensively, but just altogether, the Hurricanes are a more well-rounded team when it comes to their overall makeup. So that's where I got a little scared going into Game 7, because this was a series where basically the home teams dominated each game, and that was the way it pretty much ended in Game 7 for the Boston Bruins, as they lost to the Carolina Hurricanes. Ended up being, it was a final score of 3-2, but it really wasn't as close as it seemed in the late stages there, because they got that last goal with about 20 seconds to go. So it was in desperation that they got that goal, and they were gassed. So the Bruins are on to the offseason. Now, questions abound, as we'll get into later on in the show. The big one being Patrice Bergeron, who in his postseason presser did release a statement, or not release a statement, but did speak to the media and was asked about his future, and did say that basically knocked down those rumors of him possibly going to Montreal, as he basically said that this is where he sees himself as a pro. He doesn't want to be anywhere else if he decides to play. But what the key takeaway, besides that if he comes back, he'll play in Boston, it's going to be whether he actually will play hockey or if he will retire. So that's still up for debate as far as if Bergeron will be back or will be retired. And of course, as we mentioned, the Boston Red Sox have actually won a series. That was something that they only did once prior to in this dismal season so far, as the Red Sox did split the 2-game series with the Atlanta Braves, and then went down to Texas and had a chance to sweep, but lost game 3 of that series, but did beat the Rangers. And tonight have a chance to take the series from the Astros, as it's looking pretty good right now. But obviously, because of restrictions, I can't give you any play-by-play of this live game. So if you want to, go check it out yourself. But anyways, the Red Sox are maybe, just maybe showing some life here. Now, is it going to be a little late? We'll talk about that later on. But the bats have finally started to swing it. At least your middle of the order guys, and Trevor Story looks as though he might have found something. He's not fully back to what you would expect for Trevor Story, but it looks as though he found something. And of course, Rafael Devers, Xander Bogaerts, and JD Martinez are just absolute studs, and they are playing like it right now. So the offense has finally woken up. They finally, over these last 3 series, have finally started to score about 5-6 runs a game, as though as they weren't able to do that at all pretty much through the whole month of April and the first week or two of May, where it was 3 runs, 4 if you're lucky at times, and then sometimes they just got absolutely blanked by some no-name pitchers. But the bats have finally started to wake up. And Nick Pivetta, who had a rough April over his last 4 starts, has really started to turn it around. And the one concerning part here is Nathan Eovaldi, who we will definitely talk about, had a rough start last night, gave up 5 home runs in 1 inning and 6 total. So he absolutely got, actually, it was only 5 because the grand slam wasn't Nathan Eovaldi, but he got smacked around last night, gave up 9 runs, and it was just a total shit show last night. But the Red Sox look as though they may have a little bit of life. It's just a tiny little bit of life. They have pulse. Will they be able to sustain it? We'll see. How far can they go? We'll talk about that later on. So that's your Out of the Box segment brought to you by myself. So we will jump right in here to the Boston Celtics, who, as we talked about off the top of the show, are moving on up to the Eastern Conference Finals, although they got a rude awakening in Game 1 of the series. We'll skip past a lot of the Milwaukee Bucks series because we're already into Game 1 of this Heat series. And of course, they didn't give any time off in between, because basically how things have gone, the NBA was basically giving it 2 weeks. I know I'm just exaggerating, but it seemed like it was like 2 weeks to a month before the next series started. But now it's onto that every other day schedule. So didn't have time to really get into the break down the Heat series as far as a preview of it. But we are into Game 1, and we'll talk a little bit about the Miami Heat here. As last night, the Heat and Celtics, I should say, we'll talk about this series, as Game 1 started off pretty good for Boston. As we mentioned, they are without Marcus Smart and Al Horford at the moment, to be determined if Al Horford, as we mentioned, who is dealing with the illness or possible exposure to COVID, who knows, with his health and safety protocol that he's in right now. Although he was there before shoot around, he was basically hanging out with everybody, and it seemed like he was going to be fine to go. That was the biggest shock, because we all kind of suspected maybe Marcus Smart to miss this game. So this is where I was, even going into this game, I didn't expect the way it ended to go that way. But I thought this is where the Boston Celtics would probably lose this game, because you're out Marcus Smart. You only had a day to turn around from a really rough series with Milwaukee, who it was pretty much a heavyweight fight. It was Tyson Ali pretty much going back and forth as far as, not Tyson Ali. I'd go Tyson, if you want to put it, 2 power punchers basically going at it. And Boston got the better of Milwaukee. But really, again, a physical series that after losing Marcus Smart, I figured that you might drop this game. But then when Al Horford came out, that's where really kind of some of the alarm bells started to go off, because you don't want a breakout of COVID to happen. You don't want any sickness to kind of happen and break out through this team. Of course, when you get in the Eastern Conference Finals, you don't want basically what you had to see, a repeat of the last couple of years dealing with COVID. You thought you might not be over it, because COVID's going to be around, but you thought with a lot of the vaccinations that we might be past having to kind of deal with some of this at the major level that we are. But we're kind of back in that situation with Al. But the Celtics almost felt like they were going to steal this game 1, as Jason Tatum played out of his mind, had 21 points in the first half. Jaylen Brown really didn't have a great first half, but Peyton Pritchard was knocking down some key threes and some key shots. Derek White was not great, but defensively was okay. Robert Williams, who finally came back, who's been dealing with some injuries, played a little bit in the Milwaukee series, but was out the last 2 or 3 games. So that series came back in game 1. Obviously, they kind of needed him too, obviously, with the news of Horford being out. So Robert Williams played pretty well, and Jason Tatum really was the star. Jason Tatum and Robert Williams are the star of the show in that first half. And they just looked like the Celtics were up at one point by 13. You get into the third quarter, and it was just an utter epic collapse. Again, I know I said it earlier, but this just has shade, at least game 1 anyways. I don't think long term it's going to be, but at least game 1 had shades of the 2020 bubble series in the Eastern Conference Finals with the Celtics and Heat, where the Celtics had so much trouble just closing out in the second half and coming out and firing on all cylinders in that second half. I don't know what it is. I don't know what happened in that second half, why the switch got turned off. And obviously, you got to give credit to the Heat for coming out, who were getting owned by Jason Tatum in that first half. He was having his way with them, but he only put up 8 more points in that second half, or 9 points. So he really did not have a great second half at all. And yes, the numbers were still great, but and then finally Jaylen Brown, who ended up having the 24 points, but again, kind of hollow the way he got them in the second half when they were down so much, and just kind of started jacking them up. But again, with the one thing that has really pissed me off with the Celtics team this year has been those dumb turnovers and some of the fouls that they've taken on their end when they get frustrated. Yes, I know when something's not going your way, or when you see Miami getting some of those calls as well, I know you're going to get frustrated, but at the same time, there were times last night where it was just dumb turnovers where the Celtics are trying to get something going in transition, but they're going too fast, or they're trying to make that long pass, or they're trying to do one thing too much, and Miami had just wide open lanes on a couple of those turnovers, like 2 or 3 of them. It was just 4 Miami Heat players running down the court unopposed after a bad turnover. And it was just so ugly to watch in that third quarter, it was so surprising because, like I said, I didn't think that this was going to go the way it did in game 1. Like I said, I thought the result was the same as far as they lost, that I thought was going to happen, but the way it happened is really where I was shocked. I thought Boston was going to have a more closer, tough fought game where you lose by 4, you lose by 3. It's a very close game where just Jimmy Butler makes one extra play there at the end, and you lose. But really, though, in this particular case, I was just blown away by just how bad they played in that third quarter. It was just so it had to been like the worst quarter of basketball I've ever seen in my life as far as a playoff series. Just to see how overmatched they were, at least in the third quarter. Now, overall in this series, I still am going to give the Celtics the edge, but just in this one game in that one quarter, it was just evident that they were missing Marcus Smart, who would have brought some defensive intensity that might have been able to get in there and quell some of what was happening and guard Jimmy Butler, switch off there with Tatum and guard Butler at times. I was just floored at just how bad that third quarter was. And to their credit, they didn't totally give up. They showed fight. At one point, they had it down to 10 to, I think at one point it was either 8 or 7 points before Miami had another little mini run and put their stamp on the game 1. But again, that's where also not having Smart and Horford out there, you could see guys like Robert Williams getting gassed. You could see some of the other players out there that shouldn't have been out there in Aaron Nesmith, who I don't ever want to see him step foot on a damn basketball court for wearing a Boston Celtics jersey ever again. I know he got drafted to be a shooter, but for Christ's sake, he couldn't hit a friggin' shot. If if he was on a kayak and was 2 inches away from the water, for crying out loud. That's how bad his shots were last night. My God, I I know you were in a situation where you didn't have Smart, you didn't have Horford, and you had to make do with what you got. But for crying out loud, there were just times where he's taking corner threes, taking some other shots, and he just absolutely had bad shot selection where it was like, what are you doing? What is going on? Just, I know he made that one really great block on Adebayo, but other than that, it was bad from Nesmith. And it was just to the point where, all right, just I wanted to see. I would have as offensive as bad as Derek White was on offense last night. That's where I would have rather seen Derek White take a shot than have Nesmith take a shot. I just can't take seeing Nesmith out on the court. Go play in the G League, which obviously I know they're over, but my God, it was just horrible. Just horrible. Just unbelievably horrible. And obviously Jason Tatum, unless he had Wilt Chamberlain's 100-point game from way back in the 60s, they weren't gonna, the way that second half went, they weren't gonna win that game, because Jaylen Brown, until probably like the fourth quarter, really didn't show up, and he showed up too late when they were down by 20, and it just was a bad all-around second half where, like I said, the first half was so misleading because you thought that with this depleted squad that they were going to be able to go in there and steal a game. But there were just times in that, especially that third quarter, where the Celtics were just losing it. You could even see it where Ime Udoka came unglued, not totally unglued, but started to with some of his players. And it was just everybody was losing their mind out there on the court. And there were a couple times where I thought Ime should have called the timeout, maybe kind of slowed things down, gotten things back under control, try to see. But to Miami's credit, though, Jimmy Butler ended up having 41 points. And it just seemed like in that third quarter, fourth quarter, anytime they needed a big shot, Jimmy was right there, made them, made those corner shots, made those elbow shots, just made those jumpers, just got right in the face of Boston. And really, it was so kind of disheartening last night where you're down, you see Miami go on a 22-2 run and just rip your guts out. It was just frustrating. But on the bright side of things, it is only game one. And like I said, if you can get Marcus Smart back tomorrow, where I thought this was, it didn't look like he was all limping around, because he was up cheering for his team. He was even, because they had the mic on Grant Williams, and obviously they have all the rest of the mics around the stadium. They were able to catch Marcus Smart kind of being like a coach as well a little bit last night in one of those late timeouts. And it seemed like he was kind of upbeat, and like I said, he didn't have a boot on. So I feel like this is where he had those couple days off now in between the Milwaukee and Miami start to this Miami series. So now that he had today off as well, I would say that you're probably going to get Marcus Smart back tomorrow. I'm not as optimistic with Horford, just because I don't know what's going on. So even if it's like 5 days, that puts him back to Saturday. So at earliest, I think probably we won't see Horford until game 3 of the series. But if you can get Marcus Smart back, I would actually feel a lot better, just because you're going to have his defense out there to help with Jimmy Butler out there. And as crazy as this sounds, because I know I've been a detractor of Marcus Smart offensively, but this year, obviously, he's become more of that pass first, assist, and dish it out point guard. to the rest of his team, and then he will take his shots, but he is more selective with what he takes now. Obviously, from time to time, he'll kind of revert back a little bit, but still, he's evolved into a really good point guard for this team, that floor general, if you will. It knows when to distribute and where to distribute. And of course, with Marcus out there, the biggest boon, though, is going to be out on defense, out there helping with probably switching off on Jimmy Butler at times. And he's just big enough where he can help with Adebayo and help out Robert Williams when he guards Adebayo. And then you'll probably see him at times on Tyler Hero as well. So he'll have his assignments, but of course that's going to be the biggest boon out there. And there were times there where if you had Marcus Smart out on the floor, he probably would have made a couple defensive stops at points where it might have interrupted that 22-2 run. Maybe you cut it down to a 16-2 run. I know, still 16-2, but okay. So take off that 8 points right there, and you have a lot closer game going into the fourth quarter. And it just will help so much more having him out there along with Tatum, along with Brown. So going forward, if you can get Marcus Smart back here starting tomorrow night, and then you get Al for game 3 in Boston, when you get that full squad, yes, Miami kind of had that soul-crushing loss in victory in game 1 where they ripped your heart out in the third quarter. But the one thing from this Celtics team that I've seen all year long is their ability to bounce back from tough losses. Because after that game 5 loss at home in the Garden to Milwaukee, I wasn't like, okay, this series is done, but that was one of those pivotal points where Celtics teams in the past with a loss like that, at least with the roster that they've had up until under the Brad Stevens era, where, don't get me wrong, I think Brad Stevens is a good coach. He's not the best motivator, I would say. And he does get outcoached at time. He gets outcoached by the elite level coaches, but he's like a tier down. He's kind of like in that solid coach category. He's a guy that he's better than obviously he's better than a Steve Nash or just a body out there, but he's not in the level of an Eric Spoelstra, Mike Budenholzer, or now, and I definitely would put Ime Udoka in that category. Well, Spoelstra is probably the best coach in basketball, but Udoka is surpassed Brad Stevens in his first year. But my point being with this team is that in the Brad Stevens era, that game 5 loss probably would have cost them the series, is my point. They wouldn't have been able to emotionally kind of get back into that series. And I just think that Ime Udoka has really brought a lot of that bulldog, scrappy mentality to the Celtics team. But I'm not saying like the 2016, 2017 Boston Celtics when it was Isaiah Thomas and a rookie Jason Tatum and a rookie or in a second year Jaylen Brown. I'm not saying it's that type of scrappy mentality where it's like, oh, nobody believes in us type of situation. No, it's not. I'm not saying that, but I meant like scrappy as far as, okay, we are talented, but we're going to fight you tooth and nail. Those are the scary, tough teams that you have to deal with. Those are as we saw, the Milwaukees. Those are the Miami Heat teams. Those are the championship caliber teams that are talented, but also have that ability to get down and dirty, get down in the mud, and not be afraid to muck it up when they have to. And that's what I think. It took a while. Trust me, we all saw the beginning of the season was not great. They were under 500. Then they got to January, and then they just took off like a, excuse me, they just took off like a jet. And from then on, it's been, everything is kind of, the messages that Udoka was trying to get through to them worked. the playing style got through to him that worked. Obviously, we saw what Udoka's been able to do to get into the mind of Marcus Smart and really get him to be that distributing point guard and then secondarily be a shooter. And then obviously with Jason Tatum, we all know Jason Tatum is a great shooter. He's your best offensive weapon. He's a top 5 player in the league, and he definitely ascended that this year. But Udoka really got Tatum to be a playmaker, to be able to, when the shot's not there for Tatum, to not take a bad contested shot, but to kick that out to the corner or maybe make that third pass, find that guy, and then just be a distributor. And then obviously then he's better at finding seams now. So of course, you gotta, along with the maturity of Tatum, because obviously now he's 23, 24, so he's getting more mature. But obviously, along with that is also Udoka just kind of giving him that confidence to really kind of open up to steal a football term, the playbook here for Jason Tatum, and he's just absolutely ascended. So I just love what, and obviously the biggest thing for this team has just been their overall defense. They are a smothering defense. And then you can see that even more when you have Robert Williams and you have Marcus Smart out there, who are great defensive players. And Udoka's taken full advantage of that. And that's just where in this series with a full healthy roster, as good as Miami is, and I know they're the number 1 seed, I'm not disrespecting them. I think this series is going to go 6 games. I picked Celtics in 6, and I just think this is where, with how well Udoka has this team conditioned, how well mentally he has them going. Even though as gut wrenching as the third quarter was, as big of a kick in the nuts it was, I just think this team is so mentally tough at this standpoint that they're not even close to what they were a couple of years ago, where they just would have folded up the tent and gone home at this point. This is where I think this is a teaching moment, because game 5 in the Eastern Conference Finals, they had a chance to fold the tents and go home, but they didn't. They learned from it, came out in game 6 in Milwaukee on the road with a chance for the Bucks to close it out, and they didn't. Boston came roaring right back. They forced the game 7 and used that home court advantage, and they absolutely took it to the Bucks. So this is where I don't think one game with one bad quarter is indicative of how the series is going to go. I don't think as big a PTSD moment as it was to see the Celtics blow a third quarter lead like they did to the Heat in 2020. I think with Ime Udoka behind the helm, I think he'll kind of get them to snap out of it and fix that going into game 2. Whereas I think with Brad, it took him a while to kind of react, and by the time he did, it was too late. So in this situation, I just think they're better coached, they're better prepared, they're better mentally prepared as well to keep this series going, to not let this be a deterrent at this point. And of course, of course, getting back Al Horford and Marcus Smart are going to be key as well, because that's as much as I know their mental and fortitude is improved. If you don't have all your weapons to go, then that's really going to be tough. That's where, as tough as you can be mentally in clawback, you can't just rely on 2 guys in Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. You're going to need your other third guy and fourth guy in there with Horford and with Marcus Smart, because Marcus Smart has become that third piece of the puzzle, really, especially defensively, and really being able to find that open guy. So it'll be interesting to see how things shake out here. I think the Celtics end up splitting here on the road to start this series, where they end up taking a close one tomorrow night down in Miami. And I think, like I said, I think we'll see Marcus Smart play in this game. I think we won't see Al Horford until Saturday night in game 3. But this is where I think Boston ends up going back home with a tied series at 1-1. Now, as we move over to the ice side of the arena in Boston Garden, the Boston Bruins, as we mentioned, were unceremoniously kicked out of the playoffs in Game 7 against the Carolina Hurricanes, where they had a great Game 6 down in Boston in the Garden. Used all that momentum at home, and it looked as though they might have found a little something to go with and maybe get a little bit going on the road. But the Carolina Hurricanes, as I mentioned before the start of the series, was the last team that I wanted the Boston Bruins to face in the playoffs. The Carolina Hurricanes have just been their absolute nightmare this season because they were 0-3 against them in the regular season. They were, I believe it was 24-1 in goals in the regular season for the Hurricanes. So they had a massive advantage. Boston was just absolutely dominated by Carolina, even though their goalie situation has been up in the air for a while. It's just, as I mentioned, they have a better, more well-rounded team in Carolina than Boston. And it really came to play here, especially at home. They used the home crowd advantage, home ice advantage, and it was just disappointing that Boston couldn't on the road get out to a good start. They were always playing from behind, and that was the part that was so disappointing. Watching this Bruins team was, especially on the road in Carolina, was their inability to generate anything offensively early on in games and get ahead early. It just seemed like they were always playing from behind. Now, I know the first period in Game 7 on the road was probably their best period against Carolina, but the disappointing part to that was they played, what, 17, 18 minutes of great hockey where they played good defensively and offensively. They had some good zone time in the Carolina zone in front of the net, but obviously they took a couple dumb penalties there at the end of the first where they had that double minor with Taylor Hall. And of course, Carolina scores the goal towards the end of the period. And Boston, to their credit, actually came out in the second period, killed off what was remaining of that penalty. I believe it was like 3 minutes and 20 something seconds, whatever it was. And then right at the tail, right, probably 5 seconds after the penalty was up, when it was like, you're in the clear, Carolina gets another goal and it's 2-0. And that's where just the way things have gone in Carolina. Now, I know it wasn't a complete bloodbath like it was in the previous games down in Raleigh, but still, with the way it's gone, it just felt like a 2-goal lead on the road in Carolina was just an absolute. It felt like the Canes were up by 5 or 6 goals at that point. So you knew it was going to be a really tough hill to climb. Boston did cut it in down by 1 late or midway through the second, but then of course Carolina scores that third goal. It's 3-1, and you're like, that's really where my heart kind of sank back down, and you really had a bad feeling that they weren't going to be able to come back. And of course, they had the flurry at the end. They pulled Swayman. They had 6 men on the ice. They were able to get a goal with 20 seconds left, cut it to 3-2, but they weren't able to get anything to tie that thing up late in the game. So it was just desperation at that point, and he really didn't have a great feeling. So I wasn't shocked. I wasn't surprised at how things turned out on the road because they just had a tough time. But for Carolina is a more balanced team. They have a better hockey team They're not top heavy with talent. They've balanced things out. And this feels like it's Carolina's year. It was, to me, it felt like Carolina or Florida's year. Now Florida got knocked out. So, no, Florida didn't get knocked out. My apologies. Sorry about that, folks. So it just feel to me it felt like Carolina or Florida's year. I think Carolina is going to be the Eastern Conference representatives in this series, as they it just feels like they have a lot of momentum down there. They have a lot of great young talent. Is it top tier? Do they have a top 10 player in the league? No, but they have some really good young players that are developing in front of our eyes. So I think this is going to be Carolina's year, and you just happen to run into a buzzsaw down there on the road. So the questions now that are hanging over this Boston Bruins team are: what do you do with Patrice Bergeron? What do you do with Taylor Hall? And what do you do with DeBrusk? And of course, what are you going to do at the back end of your defense? You're going to trade Grzelcyk. You're going to trade Mike Riley. What are you going to do on defense as far as the back end? Now, obviously, the biggest one is going to be Patrice Bergeron, who is ticketed to be a free agent. He's 36 years old. He's played in the NHL since he was 18 years old. He's played since 2003, I believe, was his first year with the Boston Bruins. Let me just take a look. But I'm looking at that. But basically, with Patrice Bergeron, he's been the heart and soul of this franchise for a long time. Yeah, 2003. The 2003-04 season was his first year on the Bruins. Now, of course, Bergeron, who was a second-round pick, 45th overall. So he was a guy that obviously in the second round, you still, because hockey have 10 rounds? I can't remember the exact number of rounds, but so he was a pretty high pick for Boston, as far, not a first rounder, but a second round pick. He was a guy that they expected quite a lot out of, and now obviously he's far exceeded anybody's expectation. He was a guy that was really a defensive center first, was a guy that was probably averaging in the low 20s in goals, had a lot of assists, but never was a top tier goal scorer until probably until 2013ish. That's when you started to see, obviously, Marchand came up to his line, and then Pastrnak came up. So that's where his game really took to the next level when he was 27, 28 years old. So at 10 years already into the league. So Bergeron's already been in the NHL for 18 years. A guy that, like I said, he has 400 goals, 582 assists. So he's 18 points shy of 1,000 points. So he's been a rock solid superstar in this league for a long time. So for Patrice Bergeron, the question is, before we get to the main question, the rumor was, because his former agent is the general manager in Montreal, and the rumor was, will Patrice go to the Montreal Canadiens, which I thought was odd, not because a French-speaking Canadian-born player that I think he grew up watching the Quebec Nordiques, but still a guy that grew up in that area. I'm sure probably watched enough Canadiens games as well growing up that I'm sure that would have been probably on his board of, all right, that'd be nice to go play for them. But I never bought it from the standpoint that the Canadiens are bottom tier team. What do they have, like the second or third pick in the draft this year? Or they're awful. They have a couple good players, but it's not a place where you're going to chase a cup if that's what you want to do. And he doesn't have to chase a cup a la Ray Bork, because obviously the Bruins won a cup and Bergeron was a huge part of that cup winning team back in 2011. But it's just, I just didn't see that happening. And it would have been awkward, obviously. I would have been so pissed off just to see him go up to your arch rival. But he did end up, he did end up coming out in his season-ending press conference and basically put those rumors to bed, and basically saying if he plays hockey again, it's going to be for the Boston Bruins. It's going to be in Boston. So it's going to be interesting to see what he decides to do, because the Bruins are in that position where you're not completely screwed as far as your future, because obviously you have David Pastrnak, who's, what is he, 24, 25 years old, and you have a great young building block, a guy that's already one of the best goal scorers. So, and it's the NHL where guys can play like 24. He's probably at 24, 25 years old. He still has 10 more years left in him. And obviously he's in the middle of his prime. He has a minimum, in my opinion, probably 6 or 7 years of absolute elite goal scorer. And this is a guy that I think, because of his finesse game, I think he'll be able to play and score a lot, score goals deep into his 30s. So this is a guy that obviously plenty of room. He's one of your young building blocks. And of course, you have Jeremy Swayman at goal, who I think had a solid season for the Boston Bruins. And of course, Charlie McAvoy, Hampus Lindholm. McAvoy is 23 years old. Hampus Lindholm's 27, 28. And for the record, Pastrnak is 25. So, and then depending on what you think of Jacob DeBrusk, he's there. And if they don't trade him, maybe you finally get something out. I don't think it's going to happen, because if it hasn't happened at this point, but I mean, you have Pasta, you have Swayman, you have Lindholm, you have McAvoy. That's 4 core guys, and you have a couple top tier prospects. So your farm system's not completely barren. You have Fabian Lysell, who a lot of people are raving about, who could be another good goal scorer. Where you're going to be barren is going to be at center for this team, because Charlie Coyle just ain't it. Eric Hall is good, but obviously he's not going to be, if Bergeron decides to retire, he's not a top tier center. He's not their number one center. And like I said, you have Fabian Lysell, but he's really not a center. He's more of a goal scorer, winger. But you're gonna have to dip into the free agent market at that point and spend if Bergeron doesn't come back. And then also, what do you do with Marchand? Do you keep him because he's getting up there in age? But it's going to be interesting to see what happens. Is if obviously Bergeron comes back, you're keeping together that first line. You're not trading Bergeron. If Bergeron comes back, you're not trading Marchand, because you want to keep him paired up with Bergeron. And obviously Pasta's not going anywhere. He's your biggest asset offensively for this team. So you're not, like I said, you're not bare, but you're in an interesting position where 2 of your best players on that top line are getting up there in age. One of them may or may not retire. So are you a true cup contender at this point? Probably not, but you're still a fringe to solid playoff team. And if you make some moves, you might be able to slide up into, maybe if we get a hot run, we could make it to the cup, but you're not in that Tampa Bay, Carolina, Florida category. of just absolute every single year you're going to be in that conversation, especially Carolina, especially Tampa Bay, who's won a couple cups here recently. You're not going to be in that you're not going to be in that situation right now. Because you don't have that other talent to go with Pasta, to go with Swayman, to go with McAvoy just yet. Maybe you develop that. Maybe Fabian Lysell comes up and he lives up to the hype. Maybe you sign another free agent or two, and then you're kind of back into that situation where you might be able to take him seriously. But you're kind of in that awkward situation of we have young talent, we have good building blocks, so we can't just absolutely tear it down, but we also have some older guys that we might want to sell off. So it'll be interesting to see what Boston ends up doing in this offseason, what they decide to do, and what players decide to do what as far as with Bergeron. If he wants to hang it up, we'll find out. Now, as we switch things over to a team that's not so hot, as we'll see if they even can sniff a playoff spot come October. And that would be your Boston Red Sox, folks. As we speak, actually, they won tonight. So they did take the series from the Astros. So they actually have won 3 series now, folks. They've actually done it. They've actually won 3 series. So they are, I think, with the updated standings, that should put them at. Well, actually, nope. They're all right. So the updated standings are 15 and 22. So you're still 7 games below 500, but your offense has started to wake up. So that's the one good thing. So you're finally jumped ahead of Baltimore. To me, the thing about all of this is you there's just so many frustrating things for me to talk about. It's just every time I think about the Red Sox, I get so worked up just how bad that they've been this year. But they did come into this game only 5.5 games out of a wild card spot. So we got a long season to go. So I'm not going to absolutely put them 6 feet under at this point. Oh no, they're absolutely done. But I'm not going to sit here and sugarcoat everything and tell you, oh yeah, everything's fine. Everything's coming up like roses. No, we're going to get back into the division because you're 12.5 out of the division still. And even if Yankees lose, you're 11.5. But it's not impossible, but you're damn near that point. You're not at a 90-degree climb where it's pretty much unless you have amazing climbing gear, you're not going to be able to make it. But it's like a 75-degree slope. You're really huffing and puffing to climb up that mountain, and you're probably going to end up falling back down on your ass at that point. So my point being is it's not impossible, but it's a damn near close to it impossible task to try to get back into the actual division race, to get back in there with New York and Tampa and Toronto. Although Tampa and Toronto have kind of fallen back off the pace as the Yankees, who I completely missed it on that end. I thought they were going to be the 4th best team in this division. I clearly screwed that one up. They're 27-9. They have the best record in all of baseball. All of baseball. It just kills me to say that. I want to vomit now. But anyways, the Boston Red Sox, like I said, the bats have woken up. So things have started to turn around offensively. You have JD Martinez, Xander Bogaerts, and Rafael Devers are all hitting now, and they're all hitting way above 300, I should say. And the power starting to come from those two. You have a little tiny sliver of hope and light from Trevor Story, who finally got off the schneid and hit his first his first Red Sox home run down in Atlanta. And then And that was last Thursday, so the day after we got off this show. And then last night, or not last night, but on Monday night, he hit an absolute moonshot over the monster. He got his first monster home run. So he's got 2 home runs. So he started to pick it up just a slight bit. He's still not having a great offensive year by any means, but he started to find a little bit of life. Franchi Cordero, who is pretty much taking over for Bobby Dahlback over there at first, until Tristan Cassius is ready, which we don't know when that's going to be. He's actually been a pretty good on-base machine, been walking. He's gotten a few gap doubles here and there. So he started to look like an actual major league player. So they might have actually gotten something instead of just being a complete, utter whiff at the plate. So things have started to turn around offensively. And of course, the one bright spot for this team all year has been the starting pitching. I got to be careful because that bullpen has been absolute dumpster fire. But the starting pitching has, for the most part, has been pretty solid. Nick Pivetta had his rough patch through the month of April, but the last 4 starts he's been on fire. And tonight he looked like playoff Nick Pivetta. He held the Astros to 1 run, and he pitched a complete game. I repeat, he pitched a complete game. That is unheard of, folks, in this day and age of baseball. Just remember, back in this day and age, you're lucky if you get to 5 innings. 5 innings is pretty much at this point a quality start. So it was actually a really good game from Nick Pivetta tonight. Gonna give him a round of applause. So Nick Pivetta pitched pretty well. Nate Eovaldi, home runs have been his absolute worst enemy because, especially last night. I mean, last night was kind of like the exception to the rule. But in Nick Pivetta, sorry, I did look at the box score. 9 innings, 2 hits, 1 run. 2 hits on 1 run. And no walks. And 8 Ks. Wow. That is actually damn good in this day and age of baseball. I couldn't say that a lot about Nick Pivetta's starts so far this year, up until probably the last couple, but 9 innings, 2 hits, 1 run, 1 earned run, and it was on a home run. Wow. Over 9 innings against the loaded Astros lineup. Wow. Ridiculous. So, again, the starting pitching, Pivetta, when Michael Wacha was in healthy, actually has been a complete surprise. Rich Hill has been a surprise. And the actual kind of dark spot in the rotation, if you will, has kind of been Nathan Eovaldi, the guy you wanted to count on. And it's been because of home runs. He's had some decent starts. Don't get me wrong, but it's been the home runs this year. Last year, it took him until like halfway through May to give up 1 home run. Last night, he gave up 5 in 1 inning. So that was the disappointing so far on the starting rotation. But so you're starting to see a little bit of life for this Red Sox team. So I think they're going to start to kind of come back to level here, because I never thought they were as completely bad and horrible as they were, but because I knew this offense was too good to not hit. You have guys like JD Martinez, Xander Bogaerts, Trevor, Rafael Devers. Those are three. 2 of them are definite MVP candidates, and then one of them as the DH, and JD Martinez should be an MVP candidate, but for some reason, DH is getting no love in the MVP voting. And you have Alex Verdugo, who's is he a all-star? He was a fringe all-star last year, but he's a guy that's a solid hitter. He's a good contact hitter. And Kike Hernandez, who he is not the prototypical leadoff guy. He has his stretches where he gets hot and cold, but he is a good, solid major leaguer. So you have pieces there offensively, and you always knew the bottom of the lineup with Vasquez and Jackie Bradley Jr. were going to be a problem. The real kind of downer has been Bobby Dahlback, where you haven't gotten anything. But to have Franchi Cordero come up and at least get on base, draw the walks, get a couple hits every other game or so, you're getting some decent production out of Franchi. He's basically keeping the seat warm until Costas is ready. But the offense is starting to come around, and then the one thing that you still are waiting for is Trevor Story to really have that breakout game. Yeah, he's had the 2 home runs now, so the power started to show up, but he hasn't had the really big breakout game, and he hasn't put together probably 3 or 4, like a week straight of solid games, good games all together. So that's the one. Once Trevor Story gets going, this offense, which has started to kind of get into gear, started to really take off. Once he gets in there, it's really going to inject some life and even more life into this lineup, which already with Xander, JD, and Rafi already knocking the cover off the ball, it's going to be a hell of a lineup once he gets going. At least the hell of a 1 through 5. But still, there's questions on him. Like I said, I'm not going to start jumping up and down and saying, "Oh, this is all fixed." No, you're still got a long way to go. You're still 7 games under 500. You still got a long way to go, but you're starting to see signs. But again, it's still the killer with this team. The absolute killer has been the bullpen. You have a bullpen that just absolutely I wouldn't trust with my life. I wouldn't trust them to carry a carton of eggs out of the grocery store without dropping them, and let alone my life, I should say. That's how untrustworthy I feel with this bullpen. They just have been atrocious, especially now that you lost. Well, not lost, but now that you had to put Garrett Whitlock into the rotation. And I know I'm going to sound like a broken record, but okay, if you put Whitlock into the rotation, I'm okay with it. I rather, for this season, I wanted him in the bullpen. Next season, that's where I was like, all right, we can have the conversation and we can seriously think about putting him in the starting rotation. Because if you go out and get pieces for the bullpen, I'm fine with that. But without having a number one closer, because now you're going by closer by committee, which I absolutely attest. It's horrid. The worst invention in baseball is closer by committee. It just makes me want to punch a hole through the wall. It's just that bad. I just want to lose my ever-loving mind just thinking about putting your game into the hands of just, all right, we're just going to juggle some balls. And obviously, I know it's not. Cora is one of the best managers in baseball, but when you give him a shit sandwich and you don't give him the fork and the knife and the mayonnaise, the salt and pepper to really make, like you say, turn chicken shit into chicken salad, you didn't give him the tools to turn it into a chicken salad. You gave him you gave him just the pile of shit, and you gave him a fork. All right, I'm just gonna mix up the crap and just hope something happens. But you didn't give him the rest of the stuff to turn it into chicken salad. That's pretty much what you gave Cora. You give one of the best managers in baseball just a pile of crap that you can't turn into anything. So what do you expect? And you took his best weapon away and put him in the rotation because this whole situation with Tanner Houck, which I'm not getting into the whole vaccine thing with Houck. I'm just saying that's when it all started, and it exacerbates that you never got a goddamn closer. Never but a fucking closer. You had Rossiel Iglesias out on the market. He re-signed with the Angels, which actually probably was a good decision because they're actually pretty good this year. But nonetheless, you had Rossiel Iglesias out on the market. You had Kendall Graveman available. You had Ryan Tepera available. You didn't even go out on the trade market. Well, you didn't dive into any of the elite guys in the trade market. You went bargain bin shopping, and it's been a mixed bag because Jake Diekman, who has a slider that breaks like 9,000 feet off the plate, which at times can be effective, but then when that slider is so far off the plate, he's wild. He'll walk the house. He's so hit or miss. Derek Strom, Matt Strom has been one of the bright spots. He's actually been pretty solid. He's probably the closest thing they have to a closer in the bullpen. He's not perfect. And then you get Diekman. You brought in Matt Strom. You brought back Hansel Robles, who started off the year okay, but still, I just have visions of him walking the house last year in key situations and just walking on a tightrope. And so far, he walked off the tightrope fine, unscathed for like his first 9 appearances, and then ever since then, it's just been a rocky go of it so far. And then Ryan Brazier, who, my God, I don't want to ever see him on the mound when the Red Sox have a lead of 4 runs or actually 10 runs or less. I don't want to see him when they have single digits on a single digit run lead. I don't ever want to see him on the mound if it's 9 runs or under. That dude had about a year. Well, 2018, he was decent. Last year, I know he had the injury thing. He got hit by the line drive right in the head. So on a personal level, I feel bad for Ryan Brazier after getting drilled by the line drive. He seems like a good dude. Nothing against him from that standpoint, but he had a good 2018. 2021, when he came back, he had a few moments. He wasn't great. He wasn't like an all-star, but he had his moments where he was okay. But other than that, this year he's been atrocious. I just don't want to see him touch a baseball unless you're down by a lot or up by a ton. I don't want to see him out on the mound. Why they've put him into, I know they're trying to feel guys out here in the bullpen and see what they have, but for Christ's sake, don't. Now that you kind of have a little bit of a momentum here with what Strom's doing and with what Schreiber is doing when he's gotten called back up, Schreiber actually has been one of the better finds that they have because he's actually pitched pretty well out of the bullpen. I would rather have Schreiber pitch in some key situations, but the point being is that I don't ever want to see Ryan Brazier out on the mound if it's in a key situation because, my God, he is just going to puke all over himself. He's going to, like he did in Atlanta, he gave up that home run late in the game. You lost the game. And countless other times he's given up home runs or big hits in situations where you could least afford it. This bullpen has lost you 12 friggin' games. The Red Sox shouldn't even be in this goddamn position of being 15-22, for Christ's sake. Thanks, Hein Bloom. Hein Bloom, you put together one of the best bullpens I've ever seen in my life. Jesus Christ. Oh, my God. It's just been awful. Hein Bloom, what were you thinking? What in the hell? What in the hell were you doing this offseason? What were you doing? You run the Boston Red Sox. You run the Boston Red Sox. You are no longer down in Tampa Bay. You don't have a shoestring budget. You don't have to go to your mom and dad anymore and be like, can I get $5 to go to McDonald's, please? And shop off the dollar menu. No, you basically have the Red Sox basically give you baseball's equivalent of a black Amex card. the diamond card or whatever those ones for the super rich, the super elite people in the world are, the ones where you have FU money, where you have an unlimited amount on your card. That's where you are. The Red Sox, Yankees, and Dodgers are the three organizations where it's pretty much they got FU money where they can spend whatever the hell they want. And yes, I know there's a collective bargaining tax where you go over a certain amount, blah, 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 blah. We all went through that this offseason and learned everything. I already knew it, but we all relearned everything this offseason. But my point is, you went from an organization where you had to scratch and claw and pull up the seat cushions to find $100 to go sign an extra $100 to go sign a free agent. Now you're in a situation where you can afford to go spend 30, 40, $50 million on your bullpen or whatever you want to spend on the bullpen. You don't have to go to the bargain basement. No, I'm not saying that you have to spend and dole out 50 million to three relievers, four relievers, and give them $50 million each. That's what I'm not saying that. But what my point is that you have the money to go spend, maybe go out and get a Rossiel Iglesias as a closer. Go get Kendall Graveman to be your setup guy. And spend, what, 24 million, 25 million between the two? Whatever it costs you to 30-something million, I'd be okay with that. I'm not saying you go lock them up for 5 years each, but maybe give them a 2-3 year, maybe a 4-year deal. You don't have to lock them up super long. Like I said, I would be comfortable with giving both of those guys who are probably in their late 20s, early 30s, a 3-year deal. Because you need those type of arms. You're not in Tampa Bay, and I know in Tampa Bay you're able to come up with all the pitching, but you had a lot of that in your farm system. You don't have that yet. You're starting to build it because Josh Winkowski, who you got from the Royals in the Andrew Benintendi trade, he's actually pitched pretty well. Brian Bayo, who just got called up to AAA, was pitching lights out. So you're starting to get those arms. They're starting to come through the system, but you're not at the level you are in Tampa. You're getting there. You have guys, but you're not quite there yet where you can just be like, all right, here's a guy we can plug and play, which, yes, I know that's the ultimate goal, is to kind of get to that situation of where the Los Angeles Dodgers are, where they have a stacked farm system, and then you have a stacked major league team where it's, all right, we can do two things. We can go out, spend a bunch of money, but we also have this farm system where, okay, if we don't, we can also take a young guy and either, if we really like him, if he's an elite prospect, pull him up, like put him in like with Gavin Lux, or when it was Corey Seager or Cody Bellinger. I know obviously these guys have been in the majors for a while now, but you except for Gavin Lux. But the point being is that's what you're doing, or with the Dodgers catcher, who was a top prospect as well. The point being is that you're at that point now where with the Dodgers where they can do anything they want. They can go dole out almost $250 million, or Christ, they could give out $500 million in a contract and still be fine, to a Mookie Betts, to a Freddie Freeman. You can go do that and still have plenty of money. And then you can be like, all right, we have all these top prospects. We can either bring them up or we can ship them out and get somebody in a trade, a la when they did for Mookie Betts and then pay the money. That's where you want to be, where, okay, we have the prospects to either trade for a superstar or go trade for somebody we really need to fill out the major league roster. Or you can take those prospects and call them up and have them play. But you're not in a situation where you're like Tampa, where you have to count on low budget spending, where you have to count on, where you're really counting on prospects because you can't go spend the big money. That you're not in that situation anymore. And to always remember, prospects, they're just prospects. Yes, obviously, when you have the Ken Griffey Juniors, when you have the Alex Rodriguez, when you have the Bryce Harper's, when you have the Chris Bryants, when you have those true studs that obviously you don't want to trade anywhere. Those organizations have them. But then there are those times where they're your quote unquote number one, but they're not in that superstar. They're not in the Ken Griffey Jr., the Mike Trout. They're not in that, okay, you're not going to ever, you don't want to touch this guy because he is a true stud. So you have to play that balance. And I know I'm kind of going off a little on a tangent here on minor leaguers. But the point being is that Chaim Bloom, yes, I understand that you want to get to that situation where you're like the Dodgers, where you have a good farm system and you have a good major league team where you have the best of both worlds. But still, you're at the point where your farm system is getting better. You're rehabbing it and you're in a good spot. You're not in the best spot, but you're in a decent spot, but you can still spend a little more. You can still do it. And you have plenty of money on the major league roster too, where you could have gone out and spent in the bullpen. But no, you decided to go bargain bin shopping, and this team has suffered for it. They've suffered mightily for it. You can't tell me that the bullpen hasn't cost them at least 12 games. They've just had leads where they've had games where the starting pitching's played well, has pitched pretty well, or vice versa, where maybe the starting pitching was okay or kind of got knocked around a little bit, but the offense came back and scored some runs, which that's kind of been more of lately. In the beginning of the season, the offense was just putrid, but now they've kind of found things. They've come back to level. They've started to really pick things up. So it always seems like, all right, this piece of the team's not working. Oh, we're hitting, but we're not pitching. Oh, we're pitching, but we're not hitting. Or we're pitching and hitting, or I should say the starting pitching is pitching pretty well. Or you're not hitting, or you're hitting and the starting pitching is going well. So it's always, or the third option is your bullpen comes in and they'll have one okay game and then they'll just throw up over themselves for like the next 3 nights, where you've played a situation where this is what bad teams do. This is what the Baltimore Orioles do, where they can't get on the same page with their 3 units of the starting pitching, their offense, and their bullpen. Now, like I said, they're way more talented than a team like Baltimore. They're way more talented than that. They have the offensive pieces where it's starting to come around. So for me, what I want to see from them going through the rest of this month and in the first couple of weeks of June is really kind of because after this next week or two, then once you get into June, you're kind of getting to that soft part of the schedule. It's like, that's where you got to start to stack up the wins, kind of see what you got and see if maybe the bullpen might be able to turn around. And maybe a guy like Schreiber, who you've called up and has actually pitched pretty well, and Strom, you start to rely on those guys. You can start to dial back the other guys as well, because as bad as things are, you're still only 5.5 out of the wild card. And yes, I know, oh, well, okay, it's early in the season. There's a bunch of teams that are still in the wild card, but you're more talented offensively, and you have pieces in the starting rotation that's actually pitching pretty well. It's your bullpen. It's the bullpen, and it's the bullpen that you got to get turned around, and it's Trevor Story to help lengthen out the lineup, and just hopefully you can get Franchy Cordero to keep producing. If you can get those pieces to go, and then try to piece together a bullpen, and then see where you are midway through June. And if you're in that position, then you're in a good spot. Then you might not have to go sell. And I know, and obviously before we go here, I don't want to be remiss without bringing this up as well. Speaking of selling at the trading deadline, if that might happen. Of course, now there were reports that, or not reports, because Xander Bogaerts was asked again about the whole contract situation, if he would come back. And he did actually mention that he kind of softened his stance, because at the beginning of the year, he was kind of dejected and said, no, I wouldn't negotiate during the middle of the season. And then he just recently got asked the same question. And then told reporters that he actually, basically, if the Red Sox went to his agent, Scott Boras, and gave him a fair deal, and he would actually be willing to listen and negotiate at that point, because I think this is a guy that I know a lot of things have been said lately, and I know a lot of fans want to say, okay, he's kind of in the Mookie Betts situation where he's gone. I never thought he was in the Mookie Betts situation, because this is always a spot where he took a team-friendly deal. Mookie Betts never took a team-friendly deal. Mookie Betts never signed an extension here. Mookie Betts went to arbitration. That's all he ever did here, was go to arbitration. I'm not besmirching Mookie Betts. Mookie Betts wanted the money. He went and got his money. I'm more upset at the Red Sox in that situation, but obviously Mookie wanted his money, and I think, obviously the Red Sox offered him a truckload of money. Who knows? And obviously, I'm not going to rehash all those reports because we could be here for another hour. But my thing with Xander is he took a team-friendly deal. He took that 5-year, 6-year deal for $120 million, or paid him 20 to 24. I'd have to look at the details of it, but he took a hometown discount basically. Now, obviously, he's still getting paid over $20 million a year on that, but of course, he had the opt-outs he built in the opt-outs at the end of the deal. And that's what's coming up at this year, where it sounds like he's going to opt out. But the point being is that he actually negotiated and took a team-friendly deal because he wanted to stay here. He had guys that he saw coming up, like Rafael Devers. He obviously with Verdugo now in the full. Well, actually, this was before Verdugo, but you catch the drift. They brought in guys like Chris Sale, although that deal hasn't worked out. They brought back Nathan Eovaldi, which that has worked out. He wanted to stay around to see what this team could do. And of course, last year they did go on a pretty good run. But this is a guy that he was drafted here. He's won 2 World Series in 2013, 2018. After Big Papi retired, this pretty much became his team. This is Xander Bogaerts' team. And you can say whatever you want about his defense. Is it great? No. Is it absolutely atrocious? No. I think he's adequate. He's an adequate shortstop. He gets by. Is he going to win a Gold Glove? No. And eventually, will he probably move out of shortstop and move over to if he stays, will Trevor Story maybe flop over to short? Probably. Or depending on what happens with Rafi, even if Rafi stays, maybe Rafi moves over to DH or over to first, or maybe Xander goes out to left or something like that, because he's a shortstop, so he is athletic enough where he could kind of move all around the field. But the point being, in this whole situation, when it comes to Xander, is that he cracked the door open for you. And I know yesterday, Scott Boras threw John Heyman, who, don't get me started on that relationship. The two are practically in bed together. I know not actually, but you know what I mean. But Scott Boras basically is like, no. We'll wait till after the season. But if the Red Sox want to negotiate, yes, we'll be happy to. No. I don't believe in this what Scott Boras is saying. It's like, you just contradicted what your client said. Your client actually told the reporters that if the Red Sox went to him during the season, he would listen. He would listen to a fair offer. So don't feed us a line of BS, Scott. And I get it. You're trying to get all the money for your client. I get it. I totally understand it. I'm not stupid. But the point being here is that Xander Bogaerts is willing to listen to offers. And it sounds like he's softened on, because I think this is a place where he still wants to stay. This is a place where he wants to be, because he knows, despite how things have gone this year, this is an organization that's actually committed to winning. This is an organization, since they won in 2004, has won 4 world championships. They've I know they can be maddening at times, as of course over the last like 3 or 4 years of, okay, what are we going to spend the money on? And finally they spend it on Trevor Story, but they might go about it in weird ways, but yes, they are committed to winning. So and I don't, and the whole thing about, oh, well, the grass, about like John Lester left and kind of came to the realization that, oh yeah, this might be that there is other teams you go play for, but still, I mean, unless you're going to a contender, I just, if you're just going for the money, which I don't think Xander Bogaerts is the total like Mookie Betts was, where he wanted the most money. I think this is where Xander wants a fair deal, but also wants to stay in a place where he can win. And I think that's why he wants to stay here, because he knows the organization is committed to winning and there's talent around him. So this is where, if you're in, obviously you heard the fans in that after the rain delay, right before Bogarts hit the home runs, shouting, "Resign Xander," and that's going to happen all year long until it happens. And this is where, I mean, I don't have a feeling if the Red Sox are going to actually open that door, because I mean, you brought Trevor Story over here, so it's hard to say if they are going to actually re-sign Xander. Where this is where I think where people kind of get hung up. Oh, they have Marcelo Meyer, which I think from all reports, Marcelo Meyer is the real deal, but he's still only 18 years old. This is a young kid. So even if it probably is going to take him like 3 more years, 4 more years. So probably not until he's 21, 22 years old. He's probably not going to be ready for the major leagues. Now, obviously, I know there have been some young guys that have been called up. All Ken Griffey Jr., A-Rod, those guys been called up at like 19, 20 years old. They've been really young and come up and actually thrived. But I think this is a kid that needs a little. He's an elite prospect. He's one of the best shortstop prospects that we've seen in a while. But still, this is a guy that needs a little bit more seasoning. So he probably isn't going to be ready for probably 3 or 4 more years. So, which would work out, because even if you have Trevor Story and Xander Bogaerts here, Marcelo Meyer's the future at shortstop. But if you give Xander Bogaerts the money, hell, you can probably move him over to third base, because by that time Rafael Devers is probably ready to go to DH or to first base. Well, depending on what happens with Casas, or maybe put him out in the outfield, or put Xander in the outfield. You're gonna you'll be able to find a spot for him. Is my whole point here. So I don't get hold up on prospects like, oh, they have these guys in the pipeline. Who knows? But this is where you have a proven commodity that's won in Boston, that's a leader of the team. And don't be stupid, Heim. Don't screw it up. The ball's in your court once again, but don't drop it. Do the right thing. And I don't care if you get labeled that you got backed into having to do the deal. I don't give a shit. If you get backed into the deal, do it. Sign him. It's the right thing to do. Damn the PR spin on this. I don't care what you guys think. If you want to try to win this stupid PR battle or whatever the hell you want to do, just sign the man. The man has been a cornerstone for this organization. He's one of the best all-around offensive shortstops in the game, and one of the best all-around one of the best shortstops in the game. Like I said, the defense needs a little work, but offensively, he hits for, right now, he's hitting like 340 something. He has power. He has 25 to 35 plus home run power. He's a great hitter. He's probably the best all-around hitting shortstop in the game. Don't let him walk out the door. Or if you do, go down fighting. Don't offer him a fair deal. Don't lowball him. Don't offer him like the stupid one that leaked out of its 3 years, and you're basically tacking on just like another year or two for $30 million. Don't insult the man. He's been a cornerstone. Don't screw with him. Give him his money. He's worth it. He's worth every penny. Just do it. Don't F it up. Oh man, this Red Sox team, they might not be good. They might not be good right now, but they definitely have a lot to talk about. They definitely get your blood boiling one way or the other. So we'll definitely keep you abreast of what goes on with the Red Sox and see if maybe now that they've won 3 series here over this last couple weeks, beating Texas, beating beating up on the Astros. We'll see if they can continue to go on the run and maybe climb out of the cellar here, climb back to 500 and see where we can go. Maybe we actually maybe we might actually have a baseball summer. My biggest fear is that this is going to be a lost baseball summer, and that's going to suck. I hate those summers because we've lived through a couple of those lately, back in the 2014, 2015, 2019, and 2020. Well, 2020 was a whole ball of wax on its own. But lost baseball summers suck. So hopefully Red Sox can turn this around. So we'll keep you abreast of everything going on with the Boston Red Sox. And of course, the priority, though, is going to be keeping you abreast of what happens in the Eastern Conference Finals with the Boston Celtics, as they will have game, by the time we have talked, they'll have game, game 2 in Miami tomorrow night. Saturday night, will have played game 3 down in Boston. Monday, they will have played game 4 in Boston. And then actually on Wednesday night, we might have to move the podcast around, or maybe not. We'll see. Well, actually, with the Bruins out of the playoffs, we might put it on Tuesday. I'll keep you up to date what's going to happen, but we'll have 3 more we'll have 3 more Celtics playoff games in the Eastern Conference to break down, and we'll see how things stack up for your Celtics going into next week, and hopefully they're on the winning side of that. And of course, if anything happens with your New England Patriots during this offseason, it's been a little quiet here since the draft. Although they did come out with some news on Matt Patricia, which we'll get into next week. And but other than that, we'll keep you up to date on anything else that happens in this Boston sports scene. And as always, if you like the show, hit the like and subscribe button on YouTube. And hit the bell as well for any notifications. And as always, you can, if you can't be here on the live stream, you can always follow the show on Spotify or on SoundCloud. Just make sure to search by the show's name, New England Sports Weekly, and you'll find us right on Spotify or on SoundCloud. And then, of course, you can always follow the show account on Twitter at NE Sports Weekly. Or you can follow my personal accounts on Twitter or on Instagram, as you can see right there on the screen, at Sean_Met28. Send me any of your questions, comments, and as always, if you're on the live stream, you can always comment there as well, and we'll keep you up to date on all New England sports. And like I said, make sure to keep up with, if you're following the show account on Twitter or any of my social media accounts, I'll be down in Fenway on Saturday for my birthday for the Red Sox game. So I will try to maybe do a live stream or two, or at least send you some pictures and maybe some videos on the account, what happens, and we'll see how that game goes. But until next week, I'm Sean Metcalf, and have yourself a good week, everybody.